The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained. El hombre sin cabeza, the headless man. The moon hung low over the dense forests of Veracruz, casting eerie shadows that twisted like grasping hands. The wind carried a whisper, a name spoken too softly to hear. And then the snap of a branch. Something was coming. Not an animal, not a man, something worse. A figure in torn clothing, its boots scraping against the earth. A man but without a head. The legend of the headless man. In the 1700s, when Mexico was still under Spanish rule, a ruthless conquistador named Hernan Valverde terrorized the region. He was known for his brutality, ordering the execution of countless villagers who resisted the Spanish crown. One night, Valverde and his soldiers stormed a hidden settlement deep in the jungle. They torched homes, dragged people into the streets, and beheaded anyone who dared defy them. "You will kneel before Spain," Valverde declared. But then, an old shaman was brought before him. Instead of pleading, the shaman smiled. He lifted a hand, whispering words in Nahuatl, the ancient tongue of the Aztecs. Valverde laughed, but his men stepped back. The air grew thick, the fire's glow dimmed, and the jungle seemed to breathe. The shaman's final words were chilling. "You take the heads of the innocent, so you, too, shall walk without one forever." Valverde's laugh turned to a scream. His men watched in horror as his head wrenched itself free from his shoulders, blood pouring like a fountain. His body remained standing, staggering forward like a puppet without strings. From that night forward, El hombre sin cabeza was born. A headless specter, wandering the forests forever searching for his missing head. A modern encounter, the campers who never came back. In 2019, a group of friends from Mexico City decided to go on a camping trip in the forests of Veracruz. The place was secluded, known for its beauty and its whispers of ghosts. They laughed off the stories, setting up camp near an abandoned hacienda, one rumored to be Valverde's last home. At midnight, the air turned freezing cold. One of them, Andres, was the first to hear it, the crunch of boots on dry leaves. Heavy steps, slow, deliberate. Then a shadow moved between the trees. A tall figure, no face, no head. The group froze in terror. Andres grabbed his flashlight, shining it towards the figure. There was nothing, only the trees. The others laughed nervously, telling him he was imagining things. But then, they heard it. A hollow, rasping breath, right behind them. They turned and screamed. Standing just beyond the fire's glow was a headless man, his tattered uniform stained with centuries-old blood. His hands twitched, reaching, grasping, searching for something. His missing head. Then he charged. The friends scattered in terror, running into the trees. Andres tripped, falling hard onto the dirt. He heard his friends screaming, branches snapping, and then silence. In the distance, the fire died out, swallowed by the darkness. By morning, only Andres was found. His hair had turned completely white, his face was frozen in terror. And he whispered only one thing before going mad. He's still looking for his head. The warning: how to survive if you hear his steps. It is said that El hombre sin cabeza still walks the forests of Mexico, appearing to those who dare disturb the land where the innocent were slain. If you hear heavy footsteps in the woods at night, do not move. If you see a tall, shadowy figure without a head, close your eyes. And if you hear him breathing behind you, it's already too late. The jungle was silent, no wind, no insects. Just the echo of footsteps on dry leaves. Thud, thud, thud. Something moved between the trees, a shadow too tall, too rigid, its form shifting in the pale moonlight. Andres had survived that night, but his friends never returned. Now, 5 years later, another group of campers would make the same deadly mistake. The dare that led to death. In 2024, a group of teenagers, Carlos, Mateo, Sofia, and Valeria, planned a trip to the forests of Veracruz for a horror documentary. They had heard the story of El Hombre Sin Cabeza, but they didn't believe. So they decided to summon him. At midnight, under a blood-red moon, they lit 3 candles and stood in a circle near the ruins of Valverde's old hacienda. Sofia, the bravest of them, chanted an old phrase she found online. Al que perdió su cabeza, que venga a buscarla. The one who lost his head, come find it. The wind died instantly. The trees stopped swaying. Then a sound, a distant rustling. Slow, heavy, something dragging itself through the undergrowth. The air turned ice cold. Their candle flames flickered wildly, then died one by one. Then the stench hit them, rotten flesh, blood, and something else, something ancient. A shadow loomed at the edge of the clearing, a man, but without a head. Run, but you cannot hide. Carlos was the first to scream and bolt. He ran blindly into the trees, his flashlight shaking in his grip. The others followed except for Sofia. She stood frozen, staring at the tall, headless figure that was now walking toward her. His body was stiff as if unused to movement, yet his footsteps were heavy, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. A wet, rasping breath filled the air. Then he lifted a blood-stained sword. Valeria grabbed Sofia's arm and pulled her away, and they ran, hearts pounding, lungs burning. But as they ran they heard something horrifying. Carlos's scream, a sickening crunch, then silence. Trapped in the forgotten graveyard, Mateo, Valeria, and Sofia stumbled into an old graveyard, hidden deep in the jungle. The graves were ancient, covered in moss, their names erased by time. But one stood untouched, the grave of Hernan Valverde, the man who became El Hombre Sin Cabeza. And then, the footsteps returned. Closer, louder, they turned. There he was. His sword dripped with fresh blood, Carlos's blood. His body twitched, his neck still gushing dark, rotten ichor. He raised his hand and pointed to his grave. A single, hoarse whisper escaped his throat. Devuelva mi cabeza, return my head. Mateo stumbled backward, kicking over a loose stone, and beneath it, a skull. The skull of the cursed conquistador. The skull was blackened with age, its jaw twisted in an eternal scream. It was his. The moment Mateo touched it, the air shook as if the entire forest exhaled in rage. The candles they had abandoned burst back into flame. And then, El Hombre Sin Cabeza dropped his sword. His body convulsed, and he let out an unholy shriek so loud it cracked the tombstones. His fingers clawed at his own neck, as if trying to reattach something long gone. The wind howled, the trees bent unnaturally. And then, everything went black. The next morning, the sole survivor, Valeria, woke up alone. The jungle was calm, birds singing as if nothing had happened. The ruins were silent, and touched her friends. Gone, no blood, no bodies, just 4 footprints in the dirt, leading to Valverde's grave. And stopping there, the skull was missing. The legend said that if you found El Hombre Sin Cabeza's head, you were next. Valeria turned. And in the distance, beyond the trees, she saw a tall figure standing motionless, watching, waiting. Valeria was the last one left. Her friends had vanished. Their footprints ended at the grave, the skull was missing. And he was still out there, watching, waiting. A village that never forgets. Desperate and terrified, Valeria stumbled through the jungle, running until she saw the first signs of civilization, a tiny, forgotten village. Old stone houses sat in silence beneath the trees. A few elderly villagers watched her approach, their eyes dark with recognition. One of them, a woman draped in black, whispered, El Hombre Sin Cabeza ha regresado, the headless man has returned. They had seen it before, and they knew what must be done. The ritual of the forgotten skull. That night, Valeria sat in the center of a ritual circle, surrounded by black candles. The villagers had found the missing skull, hidden beneath a tree that bled red sap. They placed it in front of her. And they chanted, Alma errante, sin descanso. Devuelve el horror al pasado, wandering soul, without rest. Return the horror to the past. The flames flickered violently as if the air itself resisted the spell. Then, the jungle went silent, the wind stopped, and a slow, steady sound echoed from the darkness. Thud, thud, thud. A shadow appeared at the edge of the trees. Tall, still. Then it stepped forward. His sword gleamed in the firelight, fresh blood still dripping from its edge. His headless body twitched, unnatural, wrong. The villagers held their breath. Valeria stood. The skull was in her hands. Her voice shook. "This is yours." She threw the skull onto the dirt in front of him. For the first time, El Hombre Sin Cabeza stopped. The air grew heavy, a crushing force pressing down on everyone. His body lurched forward, his fingers trembling as they reached for the skull. The villagers stepped back. The fire roared higher, and then, a scream. Not human, not earthly ... a sound that shattered the night. The moment his fingers touched his skull, his body convulsed. Dark veins spread across his skin, his bones cracked violently. The ground split open beneath him, pulling him down. Back into his forgotten grave, the last thing Valeria saw was his fingers clawing desperately at the dirt. Then silence. The jungle breathed again. The wind returned. The flames died down. And the curse was lifted. 1 year later, the shadow returns. Valeria never spoke of that night. She tried to move on, but something was wrong. One evening, as she walked home, she passed by a mirror and froze, because in the reflection behind her, a tall figure stood motionless, headless, waiting. Thud, thud, thud. The curse never truly ended. La Carreta de la Muerte, the cart of death. The night is silent, the air is cold, then a distant creaking sound. Wooden wheels slowly turning, chains dragging across the ground. A black horse-drawn cart emerges from the mist, its driver a skeletal figure cloaked in darkness. This is La Carreta de la Muerte, the cart of death. It does not carry the living, it carries souls. And if you hear it passing by your home, it may be coming for you next. The legend of La Carreta de la Muerte. For centuries, people across Mexico and Central America have whispered about a cursed wooden cart that roams the streets in the dead of night. It is said that those who hear its wheels creaking and chains rattling must never look outside. Because if you see the cart, your soul will be marked for death. The origins of La Carreta de la Muerte are uncertain, but many believe it is driven by death itself, coming to collect the souls of those who are about to die. In some versions of the tale, the driver is a skeletal figure, cloaked in rags and holding the reins of two black horses with glowing red eyes. In others, a hooded monk sits atop the cart, his face hidden in shadow, whispering prayers for the doomed souls he carries. No matter the version, one thing remains the same. If the cart stops in front of your house, someone inside will not live to see the morning. Encounters with the death cart. Many terrified witnesses claim to have heard La Carreta de la Muerte in the dead of night. Some have even seen it, and lived to tell the tale. A farmer in Oaxaca reported hearing wooden wheels creaking outside his home at midnight. When he peeked through the window, he saw a shadowy cart moving down the dirt road, but it left no tracks behind. The next day, his neighbor was found dead in his sleep. An old woman in Chiapas swore she saw a rotting wooden cart pass by her home. A week later, she fell ill and never recovered. Before she died, she told her family, "The cart came for me that night." A man in Mexico City claimed he once followed the sound of the rattling chains, trying to prove it was just a legend. As he got closer, the air became ice cold. Then he saw it, a black horse-drawn cart, moving without a driver. As soon as he turned to run, a bony hand reached out from the cart and he blacked out. He woke up the next morning, his hair completely white from terror. The most chilling part, some say La Carreta de la Muerte does not always come for the sick or the elderly. Sometimes, it comes for those who least expect it. The cart in modern times, even in today's world, where superstitions are often dismissed, the legend of La Carreta de la Muerte refuses to die. Residents of small villages in Mexico claim that on certain nights, especially before Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, they can hear the ghostly cart rolling through the streets. Drivers on rural highways have reported seeing a horse-drawn cart appearing out of nowhere, only to vanish seconds later. Some believe that if you hear the sound of creaking wood and rattling chains in the wind, but there is no cart in sight, it means death is near. One thing is certain, if you ever hear La Carreta de la Muerte approaching, whatever you do, Do not open your door, and never look outside. Because if you see the cart, your time may already be up. The night is still, the village sleeps. Then a groaning sound of wooden wheels, a chain scraping against stone. And then silence. Someone inside the house shudders. They heard it, but they do not dare to move. They know what comes next. A cold wind seeps through the cracks of the door, shadows lengthen. The scent of rotting wood and candle wax fills the air. Then a slow, deliberate knock on the door. Death has arrived. The man who challenged the cart. One of the most terrifying stories about La Carreta de la Muerte comes from a town in Guatemala, where an old man named Gaspar claimed the legend was nothing more than a ghost story. Gaspar was a grave digger, known for his lack of fear. He laughed at the idea of the death cart, saying, "It's just an old tale to scare children." One night, as he walked home from the cemetery, he heard it. The wheels creaked, the chains dragged. Gaspar, emboldened by alcohol, spat on the ground and shouted into the darkness, "Come on, then, show yourself." The street fell silent, even the wind stopped blowing. Then, from the shadows, it appeared, a massive wooden cart, its wheels splintered and worn, its horses black as the void, their eyes burning red. And then he saw the driver, a gaunt, skeletal figure, its hollow eyes locked onto him. Gaspar tried to run, but his body wouldn't move. The driver lifted a hand, long, bony fingers pointing straight at him. A voice, like whispering death, rasped. "You called and I have come." Gaspar collapsed, his body convulsing. By morning, the villagers found him lying in the street, his eyes wide open in horror. His hair had turned completely white, and when they shook him he was stone cold dead. A warning from the dead. Some believe that La Carreta de la Muerte does not just collect souls, it delivers warnings. In the town of Mérida, Yucatan, an old woman named Dona Marisol was known for her deep faith. One night, she awoke to the sound of chains rattling outside her home. She knew the legend, but instead of hiding, she knelt and prayed. As the noise grew louder, she whispered, "If you have come for me, let me say goodbye." The sound suddenly stopped. The air became deathly cold. And then a voice. Not from outside, but from inside the room. "Not yet." The next morning, she told her family what had happened. 1 week later, her youngest grandson, who had been perfectly healthy, fell into a coma and died. She never heard the cart again. Some say the death cart had come for her that night but took another soul instead. The cart in the modern world, despite technology and modern beliefs, La Carreta de la Muerte is still feared in many parts of Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Security cameras in rural towns have recorded shadowy horse-drawn carts moving through empty streets only for them to vanish into thin air. Taxi drivers working the night shift have reported hearing the unmistakable sound of wooden wheels rolling behind them, only to turn and find nothing there. In El Salvador, a group of teenagers exploring an abandoned village at night heard loud creaking. One of them turned on his phone's flashlight, and for a split second, he saw the back of a wooden cart disappearing into the fog. The next day, his uncle died unexpectedly. Many now believe that the death cart does not just roam the streets anymore, it follows whoever it chooses. How to survive the death cart? Legends say there are only 3 ways to escape the curse of La Carreta de la Muerte. Never look at it directly. If you hear it, stay inside, close your eyes, and pray. If it stops at your door, do not answer. No matter what, never open the door even if you hear a voice calling your name. Leave an offering outside your home, a candle, a rosary, or a handful of salt. Some believe this can keep death away for now. But there is one last warning. If you ever hear La Carreta de la Muerte call your name, it is already too late. The darkness was absolute, the silence unnatural. Then, a slow creaking sound. The rattling of rusted chains. And then, the voice. A whisper that seeped into the bones. Your time has come. The cursed origins of the death cart. To understand La Carreta de la Muerte, we must go back hundreds of years to a time of betrayal, blood, and a deal with the devil. The legend says that in 16th century Guatemala, there was a man named Julian Mendoza, a wealthy merchant who sold coffins and burial plots. But Julian was not a good man. He stole from grieving families, charging exorbitant prices for burials. He dug up bodies in the dead of night, reselling coffins to new customers. He sold cursed objects to the desperate, promising them protection while sealing their fate. One night, an old woman came to him in tears. Her son had died, and she begged for a coffin, but she had no money. Julian laughed in her face. "The dead are dead," he sneered. "Why waste a good coffin?" The woman's eyes darkened, her frail hands tightening into fists. She leaned in close, whispering something that chilled his blood. "Then may you never rest, even in death." That night, Julian heard something outside his home. The sound of wheels rolling, of chains dragging, and then a knock at his door. When he opened it, he saw a massive wooden cart, pulled by skeletal horses. And standing at the front was a figure cloaked in shadows, its face nothing but a skull grinning in the moonlight. It lifted a bony hand and pointed at him. Julian tried to scream, but his voice vanished. The cart's doors swung open. The last thing he saw was his own coffin inside it. By morning, Julian was gone. The only thing left was his boots, lying in the street. And from that night on, La Carreta de la Muerte roamed the land, taking those whose time had come. A family's last night. In 2022, a family in Oaxaca, Mexico, experienced something they will never forget. It was 2:43 a.m. when they woke to the sound of wheels grinding against gravel. The father, Miguel, got up to check. His wife grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "It's the cart." But Miguel didn't believe in ghost stories. He stepped outside. The street was empty. But then he saw the shadow moving at the end of the road. A dark shape, growing larger, coming closer. And then the glow of lanterns. Two massive black horses emerged from the fog, their eyes burning red. The cart rolled forward, its wooden wheels scraping against the pavement. And sitting atop it, a cloaked figure, holding the reins. The air turned freezing cold. Miguel tried to run back inside, but his body locked in place. The figure lifted a hand. It pointed at the house, at his wife, at his son. The cart rolled past slowly, deliberately. And then it vanished. Miguel rushed inside, his heart pounding. His wife sat frozen, her eyes filled with terror. And then, their son's room went silent. They ran inside. Their 8-year-old boy lay motionless. His skin ice cold. His eyes wide open, staring at something invisible. He was dead. No warning, no illness, just gone. Miguel's wife let out a wail of agony. And in the distance, the cart creaked once more. The final rule, the name on the list. There is one last secret about La Carreta de la Muerte, one that very few people know. The cart does not wander aimlessly, it follows a list. A list of names, written in black ink on rotting parchment. If your name is on that list, it will find you. No matter where you hide, no matter how much you pray. The cart never stops. The cart never forgives. And when you hear it calling your name, run. But it won't matter, because it is already too late. El Cementerio de las Almas, the cemetery of souls. The cemetery was silent, but not empty, not at night. In Guanajuato, Mexico, there stood an ancient burial ground, older than any living memory. The villagers called it El Cementerio de las Almas, the cemetery of souls. It was not merely a resting place for the dead, it was a prison. And those who dared to walk its paths after dark would hear the voices of the damned. The legend of the whispering souls, the story of El Cementerio de las Almas, was one of betrayal, suffering, and eternal punishment. Long ago, during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, the land had been used as a secret burial site. A place where heretics, witches, and criminals were thrown into unmarked graves. No last rites, no prayers, only pain, only rage. They say the dead never found peace. Instead, they whispered, calling out for vengeance, begging for release. And on certain nights, when the moon was high and the wind was still, their voices filled the air, soft, insistent, hungry. The Dare, a night in the cemetery, present day, to skeptics, one night of terror. It's just a stupid legend, Marco laughed, shaking his head. People love ghost stories. His friend, Alejandro, grinned, setting up his camera. Then let's prove it's fake. We'll spend the whole night inside live streaming. No ghosts, no whispers, just another boring night. They climbed over the rusted gate, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick, damp with the scent of old earth and decay. The gravestones stood crooked and forgotten, some cracked open by time. It was too quiet, no crickets, no wind. Only their footsteps, crunching on dry leaves. Then, a whisper, "Marco." They both froze. The whisper came from behind them. They spun around. No one was there. Then, "Alejandro." The voice was closer. The air turned ice cold. And the ground beneath them began to shift. The graves were opening. El Fantasma del Tren, the train ghost. The night is silent, the tracks abandoned, then a distant whistle. The sound of grinding steel echoes in the darkness, growing louder. A train approaches, but there's no conductor, no passengers, and no end to its journey. This is El Fantasma del Tren, the train ghost, a cursed locomotive that rides the rails of Mexico forever, searching for lost souls to take with it. And if you ever see it, you must never get on. The legend of the ghost train. The origins of El Fantasma del Tren are unclear, but stories of a cursed train have circulated throughout Mexico for decades. One of the most famous tales speaks of a luxury passenger train in the early 1900s, traveling through the mountains of northern Mexico. The train was said to be the pride of the railway system, carrying wealthy travelers, politicians, and merchants. But on one fateful night, as the train crossed a narrow bridge over a deep canyon, it vanished. The tracks showed no signs of derailment. No bodies were ever recovered. It was as if the train had simply disappeared into thin air. For years, railway workers avoided the area, fearing the cursed spot where the train was last seen. And then the sightings began. Encounters with the train ghost. Over the years, travelers, conductors, and villagers have reported chilling encounters with El Fantasma del Tren. A midnight worker at an old railway station claimed to see a train pulling in. But when he approached, it was empty, the lights flickered, the doors opened, but there was no one inside. Suddenly, a cold wind rushed past him, and the train vanished before his eyes. A group of teenagers exploring an abandoned railroad heard the sound of a train approaching. They ran off the tracks just in time, but when they turned to look, there was nothing there. A woman who boarded what she thought was a late-night commuter train found herself surrounded by silent passengers in old-fashioned clothing. When she tried to ask where the train was going, no one answered. The last thing she remembered was the lights flickering. Then she woke up the next morning, alone on the tracks, miles away from home. Many believe El Fantasma del Tren only appears to lost souls, the desperate, or those about to die. And if you step aboard, you never come back. The train ghost in modern times. Even in today's world of high-speed trains and modern railway systems, the legend continues. Metro train operators in Mexico City have reported ghostly trains on security cameras, trains that do not exist in the schedule. Old railway tunnels and abandoned tracks are said to be haunted by the sound of distant whistles, even when no trains have passed in decades. Some believe the train still travels between worlds, appearing to those who are about to die, offering them a final ride into the unknown. One thing is certain: if you're walking near the train tracks at night and hear the sound of approaching steel, you must never look back, because if you do, the doors will open for you. And once you step inside, you'll never leave. El Niño del Bolero, the boy with the toy. In an abandoned house on the outskirts of Mexico City, where the walls are cracked and covered in dust, a faint clacking sound echoes through the empty halls. Clack, clack, clack. It's the unmistakable noise of a bolero, an old wooden toy ball attached to a stick by a string. No one has lived here for decades. But if you step inside, you might hear laughter, or worse. You might see a small figure standing in the shadows, holding a bolero in his tiny hands. This is the story of El Niño del Bolero, the spirit of a child who met a tragic end and now haunts the forgotten places where no one dares to go. The tragic death of the boy. The legend tells of a young boy who lived in the house many years ago. He was always seen playing outside with his bolero, his laughter filling the air as he tried to land the wooden ball onto the peg. One stormy night, as his parents were away, the boy wandered too close to the rickety staircase. The house was old, the wood rotting. No one knows exactly how it happened, but the child lost his balance and fell. His small body hit the hard floor, his bolero rolling out of his hands. By the time his parents returned, he was already gone. The house was eventually abandoned, but his spirit never left. Encounters with the ghostly child. Years later, new families tried to move into the house, but none of them stayed for long. The clacking of the bolero would wake them in the middle of the night. Doors would creak open on their own, and faint childlike giggles would echo through the halls. One terrified resident reported waking up to see a small shadow standing at the foot of their bed, clutching a bolero in its tiny hands. When they turned on the lights, the room was empty. Another family recalled leaving a brand new toy truck in the living room, only to wake up and find it completely shattered as if someone had thrown it in anger. But the most chilling story comes from a group of urban explorers who entered the house at midnight, armed with flashlights and cameras. They laughed at the warnings, dismissing them as superstition. Then, from the darkness, they heard it. Clack, clack, clack. One of them turned his flashlight towards the sound and froze in terror. Standing at the end of the hallway was a small boy, his face hidden in shadows. In his hands, he held a bolero, swinging it back and forth. The explorers ran for their lives, but one of them swore that as they left the house, he heard a child's voice whispering softly behind him. "Queers Juger, do you want to play?" The legend lives on. Even today, locals avoid the abandoned house. Those brave enough to approach it at night claim to hear the unmistakable sound of the bolero, even though the house is empty. Some say that El Niño del Bolero is not just a ghost, but something far worse, a spirit angry and lonely, searching for someone to play with. Even if it means dragging them into the darkness with him. So if you ever hear the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a bolero, run, because he might be waiting for you to answer his question. Queers Juger. El Pozo Maldito, The Cursed Well Part 1, The Whispering Depths. The water was black, still, and hungry. In the heart of an abandoned Mexican village, hidden deep in the countryside, there lay an old well. A place so feared that the villagers refused to speak its name. They called it El Pozo Maldito, the Cursed Well. It was said that those who peered inside would never be the same again. The legend of the well, the story of El Pozo Maldito, stretched back for generations. Some claimed it was once a sacred well, used by the ancient Maya for rituals and sacrifices. Others whispered that long ago, a woman accused of witchcraft had been thrown into its depths. As she fell, she cursed the water, vowing to drag others down with her. And so, the well became a doorway. A pit where the restless dead gathered, waiting to pull the living into their world. The villagers avoided it, warning travelers. Stay away from the well, it calls to the lonely. And it never lets go, but no one ever listened. The drunken bet, present day, 3 friends, Adair. One night, 3 friends Hector, Luis, and Diego sat around a campfire, passing a bottle of mezcal between them. They were young, reckless, and desperate for a thrill. "It's just a stupid hole in the ground," Hector scoffed. "Ghosts aren't real," Luis grinned, holding up his phone. "Let's go live on Instagram, see who's brave enough to stare into the well the longest." Diego hesitated. "My abuelo warned me about that place." But peer pressure won. Drunk and laughing, they stumbled through the moonlit forest, following a forgotten path until they reached it, El Pozo Maldito. The well was deeper than they expected. Its stone walls were cracked with age, overgrown with vines. A cold wind seemed to rise from within, even though the night was warm. They peered over the edge, darkness, endless. And then, a whisper, soft, echoing, calling them by name. Hector, Luis, Diego. Their breath froze. The water, still and black, began to ripple. Something was moving beneath the surface, and it was coming up. El Traje del Diablo, the devil's suit, deep in the heart of Mexico City, hidden in an old tailor shop that has long since closed, there is a suit no one dares to touch. The glass display case that holds it is cracked, and the once elegant fabric is said to whisper when no one is around. Those who have tried to wear the suit never live to tell the tale. This is the story of El Traje del Diablo, a cursed suit that carries a dark secret, a soul trapped in its fine threads, waiting for its next victim. The origins of the cursed suit. The legend begins in the early 1900s, when a wealthy man named Don Ezekiel walked into an exclusive tailor shop, searching for a suit that would make him look powerful, invincible. The tailor, an elderly man with trembling hands, had a strange look in his eyes as he led Don Ezekiel to the back of the shop. There, hanging on a golden rack, was the most perfect suit he had ever seen, a deep black fabric that shimmered under the dim candlelight, its stitches seemingly too flawless, too precise. "This suit will make you unstoppable," the tailor said with a wicked grin, "but it comes at a price." Don Ezekiel ignored the warning and paid a small fortune for the suit, eager to wear it that very night. But as soon as he slipped the jacket over his shoulders, something changed. His reflection in the mirror looked distorted, the grin on his face stretching too wide. His hands trembled, his skin turning pale and lifeless. Within minutes, he collapsed onto the floor, his body cold, hollow, empty. The tailor simply sighed, picked up the lifeless corpse, and dragged it into the back room. Then, carefully, he brushed the suit off and placed it back on the golden rack ready for the next customer. Encounters with the haunted suit. Over the years, many others came to buy the suit, drawn by its unnatural perfection, and each one met the same fate. One man, a politician hoping to impress his rivals, wore the suit to a grand party. Halfway through the night, he began screaming, clutching at his chest as if something inside him was trying to crawl out. He collapsed on the ballroom floor, his face twisted in agony. When they removed the suit from his body, it was as if he had aged 100 years in an instant. His skin shriveled, his eyes hollow and lifeless. The suit, however, remained pristine, untouched, waiting for its next victim. The tailor's dark secret. Rumors spread that the tailor had made a deal with the devil that each time someone wore the suit, their soul was taken and stitched into the fabric. Some believe that if you listen closely to the suit, you can hear whispers, the voices of those it has consumed. One night, the tailor vanished, his shop left abandoned, but the suit remained. A new tailor moved in years later and found the golden rack still standing, the black suit hanging in place. Curious, he reached out to touch the fabric only to jerk his hand away in terror. The suit was warm, as if something inside it was still alive. The suit in the modern day. Though the shop has long since closed, the suit is said to still exist, locked away in a private collection. Some say it appears at auctions, offered to the highest bidder. Others claim that the devil himself wears it, appearing in different places across Mexico, always impeccably dressed in a black suit that gleams under the moonlight. But one thing is certain, if you ever come across a suit that feels too perfect, too flawless, do not put it on. Because once you wear El Traje del Diablo, you can never take it off. La Cueva de los Espíritus, the Cave of Spirits. The jungle whispered its warnings. Deep within the mist-covered mountains of Mexico, there was a place where even the bravest refused to go, La Cueva de los Espíritus. The Cave of Spirits, a place where the air was thick with murmurs, where shadows moved without light, and where those who entered never returned the same. The legend of the cave. Centuries ago, the indigenous people of the region spoke of a hidden portal, a gateway between the living world and the dead. They believed that inside the cave, lost souls wandered eternally, whispering to those foolish enough to enter. If one listened too closely, their soul could be stolen. Some said it was a place of punishment where spirits trapped between worlds waited, desperate to take the body of a living host. Others believed it was a sacred passage, guarded by something ancient and hungry. But one thing was certain, no one left unscathed. The college students who dared. Present day, a group of friends. Late one night, a group of college students from Mexico City, eager to prove their bravery, set out on a journey into the jungle. Their leader, Sergio, had heard the stories but laughed them off. Ghosts, portals, it's just an old cave, he smirked. We'll go in, take some pictures, and be famous. His friends hesitated, but curiosity and pride pushed them forward. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they followed an old, forgotten path, the jungle growing unnaturally quiet as they neared the cave. The entrance yawned open, a gaping mouth of jagged stone. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. And then, a voice, low, distant, calling. No entering, do not enter. But it was already too late. They stepped inside, and the cave swallowed them whole. La Mujer del Pozo, the woman in the well. Even in the dead of night, when the world is silent and still, some claim they can hear the faint sound of dripping water. A whisper rises from the darkness, echoing from an old, forgotten well. Don Estes, where are you? Those who dare to look into the depths of the well say they see something moving, a pale hand reaching up, desperate to escape. But no one ever pulls her out. Because La Mujer del Pozo, the woman in the well, is not looking for help, she's looking for revenge. The legend of the woman in the well. Long ago, in a small Mexican village, there lived a young woman named Isabella. She was known for her beauty, but also for her kindness, a soul too pure for the cruel world she lived in. Unfortunately, her beauty caught the eye of a wealthy landowner, a man who always got what he wanted. One night, when Isabella rejected his unwanted advances, he became enraged. He refused to be humiliated by a mere village girl. So, in a fit of jealous fury, he grabbed her, dragged her into the forest, and threw her into an abandoned well. She screamed, clawing at the stone walls, but the well was deep, and no one could hear her cries. For days, she struggled to stay alive, her voice growing weaker as the darkness swallowed her whole. Eventually, the water claimed her, and yet, she never left. Encounters with the woman in the well. After her tragic death, the village suffered a series of strange occurrences. Children playing near the well disappeared, their small footprints leading to the edge but never away. Farmers heard weeping in the night, but whenever they approached the well, the sound would stop, replaced by an unnatural silence. A young man who tried to clean the well fell in, his body never recovered. But the next morning, the villagers found his hat floating on the surface and swore they saw a woman's reflection in the water, smiling coldly. Some say that if you peer into the well for too long, you'll feel hands grab your ankles, pulling you down. Others claim they have seen a wet, shadowy figure wandering near wells at night, her hair dripping, her eyes hollow and filled with hatred. And if you hear her whisper your name, it's already too late. The woman in the well today, even now, abandoned wells across Mexico are said to be haunted by her vengeful spirit. In some towns, people seal old wells with concrete, fearing what might crawl out. In modern cities, deep drainage systems and old water reservoirs are rumored to be her new home, waiting for someone to look down at the wrong time. A security guard in Mexico City once claimed he saw a figure standing in knee-deep water while patrolling an underground tunnel. When he shined his flashlight, she turned to him, her face bloated, her mouth full of black water. The next day, he quit his job and refused to speak of it again. The most terrifying part, no one knows which well is hers. She could be in any of them, or all of them. And one day, if you're not careful, you might hear the whisper of dripping water. And then, a voice from the darkness, Don Estes. Los Perros Fantasmas, the ghost dogs. The cemetery is silent. The wind howls through the graves, then a low growl. From the shadows, glowing red eyes appear. A pack of black, spectral dogs emerges, their bodies half transparent, their paws leaving no prints on the ground. They are Los Perros Fantasmas, the ghost dogs, ancient spirits that guard the dead and chase away intruders. If you hear their growls in the darkness, run. Because if they catch you, they will drag your soul into the afterlife. The legend of the ghost dogs. Throughout Mexico, stories of phantom dogs have been whispered for centuries. Some believe these spirits are guardians of the underworld, protecting the dead from those who would disturb their rest. Others say they are vengeful spirits, seeking retribution against those who have wronged them. One of the most feared legends comes from a forgotten cemetery in Oaxaca, where it is said that a cruel grave robber once tried to steal valuables from the tombs. As he dug into the ground, he heard a deep, menacing growl behind him. When he turned, he saw a pack of massive, ghostly dogs, their fur as dark as the night, their eyes burning like fire. He ran, but the dogs followed him relentlessly, their snarls echoing through the cemetery. By the time the townspeople found him the next morning, he was a lifeless husk, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. From that night forward, no one dared to disturb the graves again. But the legend warns, if you enter the cemetery with ill intentions, the ghost dogs will come for you. Encounters with the Phantom Pack. Over the years, night watchmen, gravekeepers, and mourners have reported chilling encounters with Los Perros phantasmas. A man visiting his grandmother's grave at midnight claimed he saw a massive black dog sitting by the tombstone. As he got closer, the dog vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a chilling coldness in the air. A cemetery guard in Mexico City swore he heard the sound of paws running behind him, but when he turned around, there was nothing there, only the imprints of clawed feet on the ground. A group of teens dared each other to spend the night in an abandoned graveyard. At exactly 3 a.m., they heard low growls and heavy breathing, even though no dogs were in sight. One of them felt something bite his leg, leaving deep marks, but when they turned on their flashlights, there was no creature in sight. The most terrifying part. Some say Los Perros phantasmas do not just protect cemeteries, they hunt souls. And if they mark you, you may hear them howling outside your window, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The ghost dogs in modern times. Even in today's age of technology, reports of ghostly dogs persist. Drivers on lonely highways in Mexico have claimed to see shadowy figures running alongside their cars, dogs that appear to be made of mist, keeping pace at impossible speeds. Night security guards in historical graveyards have captured strange footage of glowing eyes in the darkness, even when there are no animals present. Some believe that if you hear a pack of dogs howling at midnight, but no dogs live nearby, it is a warning that the spirits are watching. One thing is certain, if you ever find yourself alone in a cemetery at night, and you hear paws softly patting behind you, do not turn around, because if you see Los Perros phantasmas, it may already be too late.
If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.